The call came at 2:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been lying awake anyway, the way I always do now that I'm past 60 and my body seems to think sleep is optional. The bedroom was dark. My wife's side of the bed had been empty for 3 years. I was just staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle, when my phone lit up the nightstand. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. "Mr. Calloway?" A woman's voice, professional, careful. "This is the charge nurse at Mercy General in Columbus. Your daughter, Nora, was brought in by ambulance about 40 minutes ago. She's in surgery right now. I think you should come." I was in my truck before she finished the sentence. I don't remember putting on shoes. I don't remember locking the front door. The drive from Dayton to Columbus is about an hour on a clear night, and I made it in 43 minutes. I remember the highway being almost empty. Just me and the dark, and the white lines disappearing under my headlights, and the particular kind of terror that lives in the space between receiving bad news and knowing what the bad news actually means. Nora is my only child. Her mother passed 3 years ago, breast cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. After that, it had just been the two of us. Well, 3, counting her husband. I'd never liked him. That thought came to me somewhere around the I-270 interchange, unwanted and sharp. I pushed it aside. A man doesn't sit in judgment of his son-in-law while his daughter is on an operating table. I pressed the accelerator down another inch and told myself to focus. His name was Craig. Craig Whitfield. Nora had met him 4 years ago at a conference in Chicago. She works in corporate HR, very good at her job, always was sharper than anyone gave her credit for. Craig was in pharmaceutical sales, handsome in a way that always made me think of the word deliberate. Always the right shirt, the right smile, the right thing to say, just when you needed someone to say it. My wife had loved him immediately. I'd smiled and shaken his hand and told myself my hesitation was just a father not being ready to share his daughter. Normal. Every father feels it. But there was something, I could never name it precisely, the way he'd talk over Nora sometimes, then apologize so smoothly it made her apologize too, the way he always seemed to know exactly what I was thinking, and adjusted accordingly. A man who's too comfortable reading a room sometimes has a reason for having learned how. They got married 2.5 years ago. Small ceremony, which Craig preferred. He said big weddings were tacky. Nora had laughed and agreed, even though I knew she'd spent years imagining the white dress and the reception hall and the dancing. She told her mother that once, years ago, but she gave it up like it was nothing. I told myself that was love. People compromise. The trouble started, I think, about a year into the marriage. Or maybe that's just when I started noticing. Nora began looking tired. Not the regular kind of tired. I know what tired looks like. I raised her through every variation. This was something else. Washed out, like a photograph left in the sun too long. She stopped coming to Sunday dinners. When I'd call, Craig would answer and tell me she was resting. When I'd push, she'd get on the phone, voice a little flat, and tell me she'd been having headaches, stomach problems, fatigue that the doctors couldn't quite pin down. She'd been to 3 different doctors in 8 months. None of them found anything definitive. I drove 3 hours one Saturday to have lunch with her unannounced. She met me at the door of their house in Worthington. A very nice house, I'll say that. Craig had done well, and she looked like she'd aged 5 years. She was 34. She looked 45, and not a healthy 45. I took her hands and asked her straight. I said, "Nora, what is wrong with you? And don't tell me headaches." She laughed. Then she looked past my shoulder the way people do when they're checking whether someone is listening, and I felt something cold move through me. "I'm just run down, Dad," she said. "Craig's been really supportive. He's been making my meals, driving me to appointments. He's been wonderful." I drove home telling myself I was paranoid. The hospital parking lot was half empty at 3 in the morning. I found a space near the ER entrance and went straight to the desk, told them who I was, and within a few minutes a nurse brought me to a waiting room on the surgical floor. She was kind. She brought me coffee. I didn't drink. I sat in a chair with my elbows on my knees and stared at the floor tile and prayed in the clumsy way men pray when they're not sure God is listening, but they can't think of anything else to do. About 20 minutes later, a man in scrubs came through the double doors, mid-50s, graying at the temples, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He stopped when he saw me and looked at the nurse, who nodded. He sat down across from me instead of beside me. That was the first thing I noticed. He sat where he could see my face. Mr. Calloway. It wasn't the question. He had the voice of a man who'd delivered difficult news before. I'm Dr. Sutherland. I performed the emergency procedure on your daughter tonight. Is she alive? Yes, she's stable. She's going to need time to recover, but she came through the surgery. I put my hand over my eyes for a moment. The relief was so physical it almost hurt. Then he didn't say anything else, and I looked up, and his expression hadn't changed. It was still that careful, deliberate look of a man choosing his next words. There's something I need to tell you, he said, and I need you to stay calm while I do, because what you do in the next few minutes matters a great deal. I straightened up. Tell me. He leaned forward, voice dropping even though the waiting room was empty. The emergency tonight was acute liver stress. Her body essentially began shutting down certain functions. We've seen it before, but usually in cases of long-term exposure to certain substances. He paused. We ran a comprehensive toxicology panel. It came back about an hour ago. I looked at him. I knew, I think, before he said it. Some part of me had known since that Saturday I'd driven to Columbus and held my daughter's hands. Mr. Calloway, your daughter has been ingesting heavy metals over an extended period, primarily thallium, with traces of other compounds. The levels in her system are consistent with months of repeated, deliberate exposure. This was not accidental. The room was very quiet. Someone, I said, has been poisoning her. He held my gaze. I've already reported my findings to the hospital's compliance officer, and we've contacted Columbus PD. There will be an investigation, but there's something else. He reached into the pocket of his white coat and took out a folded piece of paper, not handing it to me yet, just holding it. I have an ethical obligation to report to law enforcement, and I've done that. But as the treating physician, I also have an obligation to her immediate safety, which is why I'm talking to you directly and not through the standard channels. Where's her husband? I asked. He was here when she came in. He left about an hour ago. Said he needed to go home and get some things for her. He paused again. Mr. Calloway, before I show you this, I need to ask, is there anyone else in that house? Any children? My chest tightened. No, not yet. He nodded slowly and handed me the paper. There was a photocopy of an insurance document, a life insurance policy on Nora, taken out 18 months ago. The beneficiary was Craig Whitfield. The payout amount was $1.2 million. I've worked construction my entire adult life. I started swinging a hammer at 19 and built a small company by the time I was 40. I understand numbers. I understand what $1 million means to certain kinds of people and what they're willing to do for it. I sat very still and looked at that number and thought about my daughter lying in a hospital bed upstairs with poison in her bloodstream. And I thought about Craig's careful smile and his perfect shirts. And I thought about how he'd been making her meals and driving her to appointments and being so wonderful. How do I keep him away from her? I asked. Dr. Sutherland had clearly already thought about this. The police are aware and will be here within the hour. She'll be moved to a secure recovery room with restricted visitor access. I've already put that in motion. Only next of kin, which means you. He met my eyes, but I need you to leave this building without tipping him off if he comes back. If he knows we know, he might run. I folded the paper and put it in my shirt pocket. My hands were steady. I don't know why they were steady. Inside, I was somewhere between grief and a rage so complete it had gone quiet. The way a fire goes quiet when it gets hot enough. I understand, I said. I drove around the block and parked where I could see the hospital entrance. I called my daughter's friend Patrice, who'd been Nora's closest friend since middle school and who I trusted without question, and I asked her to come to the hospital at first light, told her the shape of what was happening. She didn't panic. She said she'd be there at 6. Then I sat in the dark in my truck and I thought. I thought about the marriage, the timeline. I found myself going back over every visit, every phone call, trying to pinpoint when Nora's health had begun to decline. It was gradual, I realized, which meant Craig had been careful. He wasn't in a hurry. A man not in a hurry is a man who's done this before, or at least thought it through completely. That thought hit me like stepping into cold water. When dawn came up gray over the Columbus skyline, I went to a diner on Fifth Avenue and ordered eggs I didn't eat and coffee I did, and I opened my laptop and started searching. Craig Whitfield, originally from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I knew that much. He'd told me that himself, cheerfully, the first time we met. Easy to volunteer information that's true. I found his first marriage in a public records database. A woman named Susan Whitfield, née Dreyer, married in Harrisburg in 2015, divorced 2018. I tracked her on LinkedIn. She was alive, worked in healthcare administration in Pittsburgh. That was something, at least. Then I found the obituary. A woman named Carol Ann Whitfield, married name. Died in Indianapolis in 2021, preceded in death by her marriage to one Craig T. Whitfield, from whom she had been separated. The cause of death listed in the obituary was liver failure. Liver failure. She was 31 years old. I put my coffee cup down very carefully because my hand had started to shake. I sat in that diner booth for a long time. Other people came in, ordered breakfast, talked about their days. The morning rush built and faded. I made phone calls. I have a cousin who retired from the Allegheny County Sheriff's Office. I hadn't talked to him in 2 years, but he picked up on the second ring and he listened to everything without interrupting. And when I was done, he said, "Send me what you have. All of it." He called back in 3 hours. Carol Ann Whitfield's death had been initially recorded as natural causes. It had not been investigated further because Craig had cooperated fully with authorities, and there had been, at the time, no reason to suspect foul play. He had collected on a life insurance policy. My cousin couldn't tell me the amount, but said the policy had existed. The pattern was clean. Marry, insure, wait, collect, move on, and then marry again. I drove back to the hospital. Patrice was already there. She brought Nora flowers she couldn't see yet and a determination in her jaw that made me grateful she existed. 2 Columbus PD detectives met me outside Nora's floor. A man and a woman, both in plainclothes, both younger than I expected. They were thorough. They took everything I'd found and told me the toxicology report had already elevated this to a criminal investigation. They didn't say much else, but the female detective, before she walked away, said, "We know where he is. Don't worry." I took that to mean Craig had come back to the hospital and found restricted access in the eyes of people who were watching him. I imagined him sitting in the lobby performing his concern, not yet knowing that the story had already ended. He just didn't know it. Nora was awake when they let me in. She was pale, thin in a way that made something in my chest crack open quietly. She had my wife's eyes, gray-green depending on the light, and right now they were open and confused and young in the way eyes go when someone is scared and trying not to be. I sat in the chair beside her bed and held her hand. I didn't say anything for a minute. I just let her know I was there. "Dad," she said, her voice was hoarse, "what happened? They won't tell me much." "You got very sick," I said, "but you're gonna be okay. That's the most important thing." She looked at me with those eyes. She'd always been able to read me. "What aren't you telling me?" I thought about how to do this. There's no manual for sitting across from your daughter in a hospital bed and dismantling the life she thought she had. There's no right sentence. I decided on truth delivered slowly. I told her about the toxicology report. I watched her face move through denial. A quick flinch. That can't be right. And then something shifted. I'd seen that shift before, when her mother got her diagnosis. It's the moment a person's body decides to stop fighting the information and start processing it instead. It's not acceptance, not yet. It's just the dropping of a particular kind of resistance. She was quiet for a long time after I told her about Carol Ann. I felt so sick, she said finally. For so long, I thought there was something wrong with me. There was nothing wrong with you. He seemed so worried. Every time I had an appointment, he wanted to come. He'd ask the doctor's questions, take notes. She stopped. He was making sure it was working. The flatness in her voice when she said it was the worst thing I'd ever heard. I should have, she started. No, I said. You trusted your husband. That's what you're supposed to do. The detective spoke to her later that afternoon. She answered everything they asked. She was calm in a way that worried me more than tears would have, that deep, shocked calm that people go into when the grief is too large for the moment. Craig was arrested in the hospital lobby at 4:47 p.m. I know because one of the nurses told Patrice, who told me. I wasn't there to see it. I didn't need to be. Some satisfactions don't require a witness. What followed was the grinding machinery of legal process, which I won't pretend was fast or simple. The DA's office in Columbus took the case seriously from the beginning, and when the Indianapolis connection surfaced, Carol Ann's case was formally reopened. The charges multiplied. Federal involvement followed, given that Craig had crossed state lines and used the U.S. mail in connection with the insurance fraud. I'm not a lawyer. I don't understand all of it. What I understand is that by the time the preliminary hearing came around, Craig Whitfield was facing charges that would likely put him in federal prison for the rest of his functional life. He never looked at me in the courtroom, not once. Nora moved back into her old room while she recovered. 3 months of chelation therapy, regular blood work, a nutritionist, and a very good therapist she sees on Tuesdays. The house that used to feel too empty after her mother died felt like the right size again with her there. She's the one who suggested Thanksgiving. She said she wanted to do it properly, the way her mother used to. The full table, the good china that only came out twice a year, the green bean casserole recipe from an index card in her mother's handwriting that we'd both been too sad to make since she died. Patrice came. Patrice's husband, who builds custom cabinets and makes everybody laugh. Nora's college roommate drove in from Cincinnati. My cousin from Pittsburgh, who'd made the calls that helped start all of this. Nora stood in the kitchen in the afternoon light, wearing her mother's apron, stirring something on the stove, and she looked up at me and smiled. Not the thin, careful smile she'd had during the marriage, the one that always looked like it required effort. This was the real one, the one I'd been watching for. I had to look away for a second. You'll understand why. We sat down at 6 o'clock and I said grace, something I hadn't done since before my wife passed, since before I'd gotten out of the habit of believing things would be all right. The words came back to me. They usually do when you mean them. After dinner, after the dishes, Nora and I sat on the back porch in the cold with blankets and the last of the good coffee. The yard was dark. The neighbors had their lights on. She said, I keep thinking I should have seen it. You were living inside it, I said. Nobody sees what they're inside of. She was quiet for a moment. You saw it. I had a feeling, I said. I didn't know what I was feeling. But you came. You're my daughter, I said. Where else would I be? She leaned her head against my shoulder, the same way she used to when she was small enough to fall asleep there. I didn't move. I just sat with her in the cold and the dark and the quiet, listening to the neighborhood settle into night. Some things you can't protect your children from, no matter how early you see them coming. But sometimes, not always, not as often as any parent wishes, you get there in time. I got there in time. That's the thing I'll carry the rest of my life, and I won't drop it. I've been sitting with this story for a long time before deciding to tell it. Not because I'm ashamed of any part of it, but because some things take time to settle before you can say them clearly. What happened to Nora? What Craig did to her, month after careful month, it doesn't leave you. It becomes part of the way you see things. What I keep coming back to is this. Craig was not stupid. That's the part people miss when they hear a story like this. They imagine someone reckless, obvious, easy to catch. Craig was none of those things. He was patient. He was methodical. He understood that the best way to do something terrible is to do it slowly, so slowly that no single moment ever looks like the moment. He had figured out that people's trust is most easily exploited by someone who performs concern convincingly. He brought her meals. He drove her to appointments. He asked questions in front of doctors. Everything he did could be read two ways, and he knew it. What stopped him wasn't luck. It was Dr. Sutherland doing his job with the kind of integrity that doesn't make the news but saves lives anyway. It was my cousin picking up the phone and treating an old man's middle-of-the-night call seriously. It was Patrice showing up at 6 in the morning with flowers for a woman she couldn't yet see. A chain of people choosing to do right by someone who needed them to. And it was something I've thought about a lot. The question of whether I should have acted sooner. I had a feeling, I'd had it for years. I drove to Columbus that Saturday and held Nora's hands and looked at her face, and I knew something was wrong. But knowing something is wrong and knowing what to do about it are two different things. I didn't have evidence. I had a father's instinct, which is not nothing, but it's also not enough to walk into a marriage and say, I believe your husband is hurting you. What I've learned. What I tell any parent, any person who loves someone and carries a quiet worry about them, is that the feeling is worth following. Not with accusations, not with dramatics, but with presence. Stay close. Keep showing up. The truth has a way of surfacing when someone is nearby to see it. Craig counted on Nora being isolated. He had been gradually, gently engineering that isolation for years. Fewer Sunday dinners, fewer phone calls, the slow withdrawal from the people who would have noticed. That's what that kind of person does. They create distance between their target and anyone who might intervene. I didn't let the distance grow far enough. That's not heroism. I want to be clear about that. I'm 63 years old and I run a small construction company, and I don't think of myself as any kind of hero. What I am is a father who paid attention, who took an uneasy feeling seriously enough to keep showing up, and who, when the moment came, did not freeze. That's all any of us can do. Pay attention. Build the kind of relationships where people know you'll answer the phone at 2 in the morning. Have the courage, when something feels wrong, to say so out loud. Carefully, but out loud. And if the moment comes when someone needs you to act, act without waiting to feel ready. You won't feel ready. Nobody does. Nora is doing well now. She's back to herself, laughing the way she used to, making plans, eating her mother's recipes in my kitchen on Sunday afternoons. Some damage takes time to fully heal, and I know that, but she's here. She's building something new. That's what we're all trying to do in the end.